We're very, very pleased to again welcome Roger Martella to kick off this program. We were working with Roger over the weekend. He has been trying to jostle air reservations. He's coming from Europe, and so we finally decided that the safest thing, given air travel these days, was for him to pre-record his 30-minute address. And so we are very excited. I've not heard it, but I know the essence of what he's going to speak about because we had a phone conversation about it last week. Roger's a big thinker. I'm hoping that what he says will be inspirational, provocative, and instructional. But he's very, very much on top of almost everything that is going on in the world these days having to do with energy and the environment. All of the dialogues going on, both domestically and internationally. So he currently is serving as the Group Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of General Electric and GE Vernova, which is also a company, a GE company, as Global Head of Engagement and Government Affairs and Policy. In these dual roles, Roger engages the world's top public and private sector leaders to align GE's innovation to solve the planet's most pressing challenges on climate change, access to sustainable, reliable, and affordable energy, and impacts to GE's people, communities, and planet. GE was one of the founding members of the ad hoc group, so they have a special place in our hearts. Great commitment to this group and its mission. In recent years, Roger's been at the leading edge in partnering the power of the private sector with the pursuits of the public sector to solve tough problems together. I think everybody knows he was a former general counsel of the Environmental Protection Agency. He's currently teaching a first-of-its-kind international environmental law and justice class at Howard University here in Washington. And he's co-authored a number of books, including one on sustainable business that is a bit more recent. So we're thrilled to have Roger. I think this is his third time. I said to him last week, you were scintillating twice. Can you be scintillating a third time? And I know he will. Thrilled to have him give his very unique perspective on how companies are keeping up with change and how those issues relate to what we are discussing here. So with that, my colleague, Tara Wakeham Flynn, will, with a little luck we'll be hearing from Roger, and hopefully everyone will see and hear this.
Well, I'd like to thank Barbara, you, and the Natural Resources Management Group Symposium for once again inviting me back for the third year in a row to share some remarks and some thoughts and feedback on some of the transformative changes we're seeing right now when it comes to solving some of the world's most pressing challenges in the world of companies. But first and foremost, I'm really sorry that I'm not able to do this live for the first time, and I really regret that. I'm actually recording this pretty late in the night here in Warsaw, Poland. I'll explain why in a few minutes what I'm doing here and why that's relevant to today's discussion. But I appreciate you accommodating me here in this virtual way. I'm sorry there was no other way to make the logistics work. We tried everything possible. And hopefully this will be helpful and something that next year we'll have the chance to be together even in the same room. But it's a real honor to be invited back again. And I think what I would say for now, the third part of our trilogy of what we've been discussing, which have been kind of the ongoing macro changes and the impactful transformations in the way that companies are approaching environmental issues, climate change, sustainability, and solving some of the world's most pressing challenges. Over the last 2 years, I was kind of predicting some things that were a bit provocative at the time. And this year, I'm very happy to say that I'm not going to predict anything, because what I'm really excited to talk about today is those predictions I think have come true. And we are officially now in a transformative era of action, where we're actually seeing, talking about many of these issues for decades, for a really long time, we're actually starting to see action in places like climate change and global sustainability and the role of companies. That's just been a force multiplier all year. and especially as we head into COP28 in about 2 weeks from now. It's just such an exciting and transformative time to be talking about these issues. And as you can see on my introductory slide here, this is all thanks to the carrot. And I'm going to come back and explain why I'm attributing this kind of once in a career, once in a lifetime transformative era of action to the carrot specifically, and share what's happening now. What are the 5 catalysts I'm seeing for why we are in this really unprecedented era of transformation and action, and the 5 reasons for that. But start first with a little bit of a brief recap for those who weren't with us the last couple of years or who may not remember, as I had to refresh myself as well. And I think last year I shared this first slide, which what it tries to do is really present the challenge that we've been trying to solve for. And it looks back on environmental regulation and environmental protection generally, all the way back to the 1970s, and points out that thanks to Congress acting and passing really strong environmental laws, we've had this era of very strong protection: cleaner air, cleaner water, contaminated properties addressed, regulations on pollutants and pesticides and things like that. And over time, thanks to these laws, we saw a lot of action, we saw a lot of progress, we saw a lot of improvement in our environment. And then when we started to get more focused on climate change, I would argue going back to 2007 with the Supreme Court deciding Massachusetts versus EPA, we tried to apply the same tools in the toolbox that had served us so well earlier. But we kind of, looking back 15 years later, had really entered this zero-sum game where we didn't have so much to show for it like we did in the conventional environmental protection era. And I'd actually shared with this group, I think 2 years ago, at the time, that time was really working against us when it came to climate change, that when we were trying to use the same tools in the toolbox, we were losing time. We needed to act with urgency. And so we really needed to start thinking about how to reinvent the tools in the toolbox. And I proposed that companies should have kind of a larger role, a bigger role in kind of reinventing the historic relationship they've had with the government to more of a partnership approach, and taking more of a leadership approach when it came to climate change and sustainability and things like that. Again, a little bit provocative 2 years ago, but now the theme of discussion and what's leading to action today. So if we compare that to the next slide, again, I think something I shared last year was I tried to balance the history of environmental protection with the history of the corporation itself, and show that during various times during the history of the corporation, including back to their founding in 1819, that the purpose of a company has included doing public good. Now, the purpose of the company is to generate returns and to have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. But there's also been opportunities for companies to do public good while they're running very strong businesses at the same time. And we specifically talked 2 years ago, which was during the COVID pandemic, a prediction that we were seeing companies really rise up during the COVID pandemic to do public good, that we would see car manufacturers producing ventilators. We would see companies dedicating space for vaccinations and education campaigns and producing masks and things like that, that companies were really focused on how could they do more public good during the COVID pandemic to help solve the most pressing challenge at the time. And the prediction we had 2 years ago was that we would emerge from COVID with that theme continuing and an increasing role and increasing expectation that companies would take more of a leadership role. And we saw this at COP26 last year, COP27, and other examples that we see in here, taking more of a leadership role in solving some of the world's most pressing challenges. So these were our predictions from 2 years ago. And again, last year, I think I shared this proposition that when we merge all this together and we look at kind of how do we compare and contrast these 3 eras, we had this very strong era of conventional environmental protection control, which continues to today. We had this era of using the same tools in the toolbox during greenhouse gases and to address climate change, where unfortunately we had very little progress, and we all shared a sense of urgency, a sense to do something differently. And now I think we are officially in this new era, what I call the global sustainability era, where we've all been willing to kind of reinvent the who, the what, the how, and the when we're going to solve these issues. And that's what's leading to success. Rather than just having environmental groups and activist groups kind of be the drivers here, we've expanded the scope of stakeholders who are really driving accountability for companies in the global sustainable era, including employees and customers, investors, the sustainable finance community, as well as governments and NGOs and activists. We see increasingly that to solve for climate, to solve for sustainability, that this is really an innovation and technology play at this time, that we're looking to deliver innovation and technology to decarbonize, to lift up the quality of life for people everywhere, to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that means companies increasingly have to be the lead actors here in terms of delivering that innovation and technology. If we think of what we're trying to do, we can set a very high target. We can set a very broad goal. We can talk about climate change. We can talk about sustainability. But I really think of this very simplistically as equity, that we want everyone in the world to have the same opportunity to prosper, to live a prosperous life, the same opportunities to benefit, to have access to healthcare and energy, education, economic opportunities, transportation. And we can look at this with the lens of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to make sure we're achieving a just transition. So equity becomes the goal in this global sustainability era. In terms of the approach, one of the things that some of the conventional folks like they go back like me might say is, well, we can't just trust companies. We're not going to completely turn everything over to them. And I wouldn't suggest that at all. But what I would say is, the good news is we're in an era of almost instantaneous accountability, where unlike the past days where you had the government as the enforcer and it would take a long time and did they find everything and the years of litigation and so on, we're now in an era where companies are, whether voluntarily or for other reasons, communicating a lot of information with a lot of transparency on their performance and sustainability and environmental performance, and accountable to their employees, to their shareholders, to their customers, through emails, through surveys, through forums, in a way that becomes kind of an instantaneous accountability that we haven't seen before in this space. We also have the advantage that while politics can be complementary, and we're going to talk about that today, politics have been highly complementary recently in driving these outcomes. These actions move forward with or without political gridlock, forward momentum with companies and with their stakeholders in moving forward towards sustainability. And then finally, in terms of progress, we're moving out of this space where we've been, I think, flat when it comes to climate change, and looking forward to the future for the first time at goals for 2030, 2050, even 2025, and running these issues like companies run businesses with transparency, key performance indicators, metrics, and having a bit of trying to project a credible crystal ball into what the future can look like. So we're looking to change the tools in the toolbox, which is leading to this era of action. So what I want to do, because you can tell I'm quite excited about this transformative era that we're in, and someone who's been in this space for 30 years, and have had this frustration that I've shared with you before, that we've done a lot of talking, we've done a lot of regulating, we've done a lot of litigating, but we haven't seen as much action when it comes to these issues. I do believe, and this is something I share when I address law students or colleges or universities or graduate students, that we are in a real once in a lifetime, once in a career transformation towards action. We're in the early stages of that, but it's very exciting to see, and it's becoming seems like a force multiplier all the time. And what I want to do is really share kind of the 5 catalysts that I'm seeing that's leading to this. And I'm going to begin with the slide that I started with, which is the lowly carrot, because I do believe it's really a credit to the carrot that's led to all of this. And what I'm referring to specifically is the Inflation Reduction Act, that back in August of 2022, Congress passed really the first, I believe, climate change law in the United States, working with the Biden administration. And we can all recognize that that's a big step forward to have the first climate change law in history. And it is a big step forward, and we should celebrate that. But to me, again, someone who's been in this space, studied it, been in the center of it for 30 years or so, I was more focused on the mechanism in which Congress chose to proceed. And what Congress decided to do, again, with this theme of different tools in the toolbox, was to move away from that command and control approach that we've been talking about with cap and trade and carbon prices and things like that. And instead put those sticks aside and move to the carrots, create an incentive-based approach to address climate change, with companies kind of being in the lead in terms of taking action. And if you really just step back and think about this, that this was a law enacted by the Biden administration, a Democrat president, with a Democrat set of Congress and Senate voting on this, to be able to step away from what's historically been a policy towards command and control for companies and instead transition that to a carrots-based incentives types approach to say we're going to put companies in the lead to address climate change, just how transformative that is. Anyone in the room, who like me has been a student of these politics and a student of these eras can really appreciate the magnitude of that transformation. And with that type of humility and being willing to just fundamentally change the way we're going to proceed, it has made all the difference. It's already making a difference. It's already driving the impact we would have liked to have seen, that Congress would have liked to have seen, the president wanted to see. And it's really just becoming a force multiplier for future action. And what's really great about this is it's not just companies working as companies, and it's not just trust companies to take action here. It's really companies working in partnership with the government enabling private action. So you see Jennifer Granholm's quote here, which I really admire her for saying this. To make this all work, we need the private sector stepping up. We often say these investments are private sector led, government enabled. And if you think about who that's coming from, a person who's had a very successful political career as a Democrat, again, a party that sways more towards command and control, to be able to say something with that humility, that modesty, private sector led, government enabled, encouraging partnership, just really reinforces the type of transformation we're seeing. And I give this a lot of credit because it is inspiring so much action in the space, which we're going to talk about, and so much partnership. And that really leads then to the second kind of the 5 factors, which is complementary to the role of the realignment with government, is the rise of companies. Companies increasingly are focusing on what is their purpose and how does purpose drive their action? How can they succeed first and foremost as a business, which is the most important thing for companies to do, but at the same time align their business success to achieving broader purposes. And what we see here, again, this is with the prediction that I had 2 years ago after COVID. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer, tens of thousands of people surveyed in numerous countries, asking a simple question: who do you trust the most to solve some of these most complex problems in the world? And at this point in the 2023 survey, businesses are the only institutions seen as trusted to be able to solve these issues. Now, I'm not here to brag on that. I actually wish that wasn't the case. I wish all of these institutions were in that trusted category. But it reinforces the point that we are in this transformative era where it's not just the government, but the public as a whole is looking to the corporate, the private sector to hold, to be accountable for stepping up to solve some of these pressing challenges. And we do that through metrics and KPIs. A lot of times people refer to this as environmental, social, and governance, ESG, which are KPIs and metrics that companies report on to track their performance, and not only environmental performance, but just being a well-run company that lifts up both their employees and broader communities as well. But also increasingly through this theme of public-private partnerships that Jennifer Granholm was alluding to. And I just want to share some of these examples just from the last week alone. I mentioned I'm in Warsaw right now this week. I'm here today because we're meeting with leading officials from the European Union, from the United States, and from Ukraine to plot out and chart a course to how we can help rebuild the Ukraine electricity grid and also make it an economy that exports clean energy and economic development related to clean energy. But you've seen some other examples of partnership here on the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, and the opportunity I had to give remarks with President Biden, and my own CEO got to give remarks ahead of President Biden at the White House celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. And sometimes we say we were honored as GE Vernova to be selected to do this, but I actually say, whether it's GE Vernova, my business, or any other business, I'm just honored that the White House thought to ask any company to give these remarks ahead of the 1-year anniversary of an environmental climate change law. It just reinforces this fundamental reconfiguration. On the top right here, an opportunity to meet with John Kerry during Climate Week in New York, and His Excellency Mohammed Al-Hamani, the CEO of the United Arab Emirates nuclear company, in terms of how we can partner together to advancing nuclear energy in the UAE and globally. Meeting with His Excellency Majid Al-Suwaidi on planning for COP28, and the panels we're doing in the Ukraine as a private sector representative on both the Ukraine, EU, US-led discussion on rebuilding the grid in Ukraine through partnership. One of my favorite examples of partnerships coming up in a few weeks at COP28, where for the first time, we're going to be partnering with the U.S. Center, the space that the U.S. Center has dedicated there, where they're allocating a part of that space to companies like GE. You see some of our colleagues on here, Honeywell, General Motors, Invenergy, Johnson Controls, Bechtel, and some other companies too, like Boeing and Baker Hughes and United Airlines, where we're going to be sharing space with the U.S. Center, thanks to John Kerry, for promoting the way that innovation and technology from the private sector is leading the transformation to net zero and decarbonization goals. So really unprecedented opportunity for this private sector, public sector to be on display at COP28 and what may be the most highly trafficked real estate in all of COP28. So beyond just kind of the realignment between the public sector and the private sector, the third catalyst for this transformation is really energy security and the electrification imperative. The war in Ukraine, and again, I'm here in Poland right now because the war in Ukraine is very much on our mind. It is, in my view, the most important thing I'm doing in my role at General Electric is helping to support the efforts to keep electricity flowing in Ukraine, keeping the lights on for kids and families and healthcare and things like that. But we're here to take very seriously the energy security risks, not only to Ukraine, but frankly to other parts of the world, whether Europe, the United States, and other places. The war in Ukraine really was a wake-up call on the vulnerability of our grid. And we're seeing other risks we have to plan for, like the cybersecurity, more severe weather events, the growing demand on the grid, including from renewable energy, just the growing pressures on the grid from electrifying other sectors so they can decarbonize. And so the urgency in reinforcing hardening the grid is really become a day-to-day driver in action. I think we talk a lot about climate change. It's been a big theme of this discussion. And I've always talked about the urgency to act on climate change in our discussions. And that is important. It's something we are doing, we need to do. But electrification is kind of here and now. It's what's driving this discussions, not for 2025, 2030, or 2050. It's driving discussions for 2023 and 2024. And that catalyst itself is driving a lot of the investment, a lot of the real-time action we're seeing. And whether it's electrification or energy security or climate change, we get to the same place. And so it's really been a catalyst for action. It's been a catalyst for investment, and it's been part of this real transformation. The person here in the photo with me is the Secretary of Energy for Ukraine, Gerben Galuchenkov, who is one of the most impressive people I've met in the world. He's the Secretary of Energy, but he acts with the confidence and the empowerment of a wartime general, because when he's talking about the electricity grid in Ukraine, which has been tragically targeted by the Russians, is like part of the lifeblood of their society, he has to think strategically like any wartime general would on how he strategizes and places his electricity and grid assets all around the country in order to protect access to the lifeblood of electricity. And on the right side, there is something as a company at GE we're particularly proud of, when we were able to deliver what we call a aeroderivative turbine. Imagine a jet engine stationary connected to a generator. That's basically what that is. We were able to ship it in an emergency way on a plane over to Poland to get it to Ukraine, the first of many, we hope, as part of an emergency effort to make sure that we're playing our part in enabling this response to keep the grid functioning, as well as a lot of other grid equipment out of the things we're doing there. But this theme of electrification has really been a catalyst for action. Beyond electrification, now, if you buy my premise that we are in an era of action, that we are moving forward, we now have a different set of challenges to solve for. Maybe this is a good thing, that if we're actually moving forward with action, some of these things that in the past we've talked about in ways that someday we'll get there, we're actually starting to get there. And we're actually looking to solve some of these issues now on what I call the ecosystem, the notion that if we're taking action to harden the grid, to address climate change, to promote sustainability, our ecosystem's not ready, and we have to take action to do it. So a lot of action on environmental justice. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act itself, one of the very clever things that Congress did is it put incentives baked into the Inflation Reduction Act to encourage economic development in historically underserved communities. And I'm going to say it again. This is working. As companies look at where they want to put factories, where they want to create jobs, they're going to look at these provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. They're going to take full advantage of those opportunities. And it's going to really enable to make sure that communities which have historically been underserved or even disproportionately impacted by these activities are going to be part of the economic development we're really seeing in this era of action. Permitting is another one. It's not just me. I think anybody who cares about these issues will say all these policies are terrific for the Inflation Reduction Act, that we're seeing the action, we're seeing action under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, but we have to solve for permitting or we're going to have some real challenges before we can see the full potential. One of the things that's changed, again, in this transformative era of action in the last 18 months, we don't have a permitting solution yet. We've got lots of great ideas out there, including more to come. But for the first time, we have much more bipartisan support. I give credit to John Podesta in the White House. He has been, I think, among the strongest advocates among conventional Democrats in saying we have to reform our permitting system. If you look at Joe Manchin and other Democrats on the Hill, Congressman Peters, also very strong advocates coming from sides that have historically been a little more dug in here, I think I would say, and being willing to kind of work on bipartisan solutions towards permitting, something we need to do to solve both for renewable energy and conventional energy security. I think permitting should lift up both sides of the equation, and those are the discussions we're having. And then finally, sustainable finance is another area. As we look to actually take action and have projects to invest in, we have to work on our ecosystem too for finance, for tax equity, for tax credits and things like that. And how is Wall Street and the finance sector stepping up to make sure we can be there in time, that these projects actually move forward in ways that are cognizant of risks and opportunities and things like that. We're seeing generally positive momentum, but we're also seeing some sectors trying to figure this out at the same time. And so we need to work on these ecosystem issues if we're going to succeed here long term. And then finally, the last of the 5 catalysts is really the global impact here. And the first is what I call the UAE effect. We're just a couple weeks out from COP28. I've been talking about the UAE effect all year. I'm excited to finally see it come to fruition because I think people are going to be very, very surprised that the UAE is going to kind of come out of COP28 fundamentally changing the way we think about who's in the room to address climate change, decarbonization, and the energy transition. What the UAE has done is, if you think historically about the Paris Agreement, up until recently, countries tended to look at that with a competitive disadvantage, an unwillingness to take action unless they knew what China had signed up for, or Brazil or India or places like that. The UAE has been one of these countries that have fundamentally changed the equation there, that they've been willing to say, we see climate change as an economic imperative, that we have to realign our society around innovation, technology, and the energy transition. And regardless of what China or Brazil are going to do, we have to take leadership in this. So Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, in the photo there, he has really been the strongest spokesperson, I think, for this. I'm a huge fan. I think he's doing exactly right. I'll be unapologetic about that. And this is going to be the most important COP since the Paris Agreement, in my view, because it's just going to fundamentally elevate, countries that have not historically played there, taking a lead role in innovation technology, and once again, elevating the role of the private sector, Dr. Sultan being a huge proponent, just like John Kerry now, for the role of the private sector and being part of the solution. Part of this is creating a global strategic supply chain that we're beyond the point we're just going to build something in the US or in the European Union and ship it to other places in the world and plop it down. Increasingly, as we look to make investments in the energy transition, we look to globalize our supply chain. We look for the communities that are benefiting from these technologies to also benefit from the economic development, workforce training, jobs, supply chain, domestication of industries and manufacturing and things like that, and particularly going into underserved communities, inspiring the next generations of leaders here from communities that historically haven't pursued careers in this space, from demographics, from women, to really inspire them to become the leaders of the next generation. And then finally, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are kind of the lens I think we use to look at sustainability generally. I'm always a big fan of the UN SDGs because while they focus on climate change, while they focus on environmental protection, they take a much more holistic view of sustainability as well. Going back to the theme I talked about of equity, how are we lifting up the quality of life for people? How are we enabling access to healthcare? How are we, allowing people to have economic opportunities and to really thrive? And so it provides a wonderful lens at which we can hold kind of companies accountable and think about their alignment in terms of how they're addressing sustainability. So as I said, we're in this, in my view, no longer just talking about it, making predictions like I did the last 2 years, really seeing this transformative era of action. Very exciting to see. Lots of challenges to figure out, getting the ecosystem ready. It's not going to be a straight line, but I feel like we have crossed the threshold by which we're moving forward in this theme of public and private partnership. And so kind of just as the final takeaway, knowing I have a lot of lawyers in the room, or a lot of folks who hover around lawyers or kind of in the same space of natural resources and things like that, what this all means, I think for the folks like us in the room who've been doing this a long time or maybe newer to this and trying to understand how they can get engaged. I'm going to be a broken record, but I can't say this enough because I'm so excited about this, that this is a transformation happening in front of our eyes. We've been talking about delay for a long time, but the action is coming, it's here, and it's forward momentum at this point. And so we have new challenges now of keeping pace and keeping up with the demand, but that's a good problem to have. Time continues to work against us. So we can't wait, we can't delay, we have to be acting in real time. Years aren't good enough. We're, quarter to quarter, month to month, week to week, we have to be showing progress and being able to move in lockstep. We have to get comfortable with the fact that, going back to my first couple slides, the tools in the toolbox have changed. They are changing. And what we need to focus on are really the outcomes, this theme of partnership. If Jennifer Granholm can embrace companies taking leadership here, I think we can all embrace that. If the Congress and if the president can pass a law that focuses on companies taking the lead with incentives, I think we all have to get comfortable with that to some extent. And I think to credit, all my stakeholders seem to be doing that. My environmental groups that I've worked with for a long time are embracing this era of partnership, and I'm thankful for that. I'm appreciative for that we're moving forward together. As I've said, we're in a new era of action. We're in a new era of transformation. People like me, there's only so much I can do. I'll try to do my best in terms of setting this up, but it's really the next generation that's going to determine the success here. The folks who dedicate their careers to this era of action, who implement these laws, who implement these policies, who become the folks financing these projects, building the factories, working in them, and just inspiring this next generation of leaders. It's really exciting, the opportunities that are ahead, but it's going to be, I believe, the next generation that really determines the success here. We'll do what we can to hopefully set them up for success. And then back to what is the goal? The goal here is equity, making sure that everybody has the same opportunity to prosper, to live a prosperous life, the notion that every life is important and that every person matters. So with that, Barbara, again, it's my deep regrets that I'm not there to be with you in person. I know we tried every logistic we could to make it happen. I hope next year we can be together if I'm invited back again, if I have that honor. But I'm excited and thankful for the opportunity to share, I think, what's been kind of the culmination of things we've been talking about the last couple of years, and a lot of the excitement for the action to come. So thanks for giving me this opportunity, and I'll look forward to seeing if there's any follow-up that I can address, if anything that comes back to you from the group.